So you've got a new Ender 3 or Ender 3 base printer, and you're no doubt champing at the bit to build it. In this video, I'm going to run through most of the important parts of the build rather than just waste time making you watch me build one, so hopefully you can get the printer built right first time without making any mistakes. No messing around, let's get right to it. It's a very good idea to check over and make sure you have everything and you know what's what before you even start building. The manual is actually very good on the Ender 3 compared to the V2, which is strange, but there you go. Lay everything out either in the box, on the desk, anywhere you have space, and don't lose anything. Check that you have all the pieces. Note that the machine screw packets have the size written on them, so there's no chance of picking the wrong screw if you only open them when you need them and if you cross-check with the instructions every time before you pick one up. Let's have a quick run through of the main parts of the printer. This is the bed, obviously. This design is what's known as a bed slinger because the Y direction the bed moves rather than the hot end. The upshot of this is it's all assembled for you, so we have the main bulk of the printer here and the hot end is dangling off it. This part is the extruder assembly and it's also mounted onto the X direction motor, so that makes it quite a confusing part, but we'll cover that later. These are the vertical bars of the frame because they're made of double width aluminium profile. The horizontal ones, meanwhile, are single width. This is the screen assembly, and there's not much to say about it. And this is the power supply. And finally, we have the Z motor just on its own, which controls the up and down of the bar of the printer. Don't worry about any bits I've not shown, because we will get to that. The Ender comes with a textured bed attached to it, presumably for easy packing and transport, but it's important at this stage to take it off and put it safely to one side out of the way to avoid damaging it during build. Just unclip it and put the clip stand itself somewhere away from screwdrivers and sharp stuff. Before you start anything, just give the Y-axis belt a quick twang like this. If it sounds anything like this, then it's fine. If it's floppy, then it's a good time to tighten it up. I will go into why you don't have to be too accurate with this in a while, but just make sure it's not loose and floppy, you don't want it to skip teeth. There's a switch here on the power supply. I don't think I need to elaborate, just make sure it's right, especially if you imported the printer from another country. Mine was set correctly, but there's no guarantees that yours will be. In the first steps, the instructions tell you to screw on the side rails. Use the horizontal ones under the printer like this to keep it level and raised to avoid crushing any of the rear wire assemblies. And on that topic, keep your wires safe at all times. For example, the ones under the PSU here, they carry a lot of power, so don't pinch them or it could even be a fire hazard. Tuck them into the rail while aligning the screws or use a shim or something to raise the whole thing up. The display ribbon cable is also quite precarious and it's not well protected, so keep an eye on that one every time you reposition the printer because it likes to go underneath. I would also advise covering your desk in something like paper so that you don't scratch it. Unfortunately, I thought about this one a couple of steps too late, but there we go. Imagine how annoying it would be if you scratched this with a screwdriver during the build. Enough said. This is the Z stop sensor, or Z stop if you're American. It's a micro switch. These nuts are supposed to align when you screw them in, and they're supposed to tighten up automatically. I find it easier to just slide it down from the top, to be honest, because I've had nothing but trouble with those nuts. Maybe it's just me. But the actual tip here isn't that. The actual tip is to keep it loose until you're calibrating the bed at the end, because you're likely to need to move it up or down. The Z motor and its screw are one of the biggest causes of problems with this printer, so proceed with this step with extreme caution. I advise you to do it in the way I have, following the instructions that Creality have given you, but keeping everything loose. Keep the Z motor very loose to start with. I also advise keeping the Z screw, that's this long spiral thread bar, in its sleeve at all times before fitting. Reason, it's very greasy and I am not kidding. Fit the Z screw like this and don't tighten it completely. We will come back to the rest in a moment as per the manual. Next, identify the extruder assembly by the barcode sticker and face that backwards away from you. Make sure you're holding the correct bar and align it so that the closer hole end is towards you. Align this nut with this hole and then use the two screw holes to fix it to the assembly. For this you'll need to use the Allen key that Creality have provided, because you have to put the screws through, or rather you have to put the Allen key through another hole to screw them into the metal frame. This is possibly the most annoying step, so do take your time, it is quite frustrating. Before you put the other end on this bar, make sure, the manual does say it but it's not that explicit, make sure you slide on the hot end, otherwise you're going to have to unscrew the whole thing and then slide it on. It should just go straight on, but make sure it's the right way up unless you're printing in 0G or something. Believe it or not, I have seen photos of people putting this on upside down and it's hilarious, but having to fix it afterwards is less hilarious. Once the hot end's on, you can put the other end on. Now, this triangular piece is notably asymmetrical, so make sure you have it the right way up. There's no tricks here, but you can again align the large hole in the frame with the nut that sticks out. So if you do that, you can't really go wrong with the alignment or positioning. Keep the tensioner loose until the very end, as there's actually a very important trick here. You'll see it. Back to the Z-axis thing again. You're now putting the whole X-frame bar with the hot end assembly thing that you just made onto the actual printer. Align it like this and just rest it there on top of the Z-screw like so. Then turn the Z-screw anti-clockwise to let it fall naturally into the assembly. Spin it with a piece of paper rather than just your bare hands. See, this is the grease I warned you about. Don't get that on your hands as you don't want to transfer it onto the printer. You now have the screw in the brass frame holder bit thing you can see here, and it should be comfortably in there and without any tension it should be free to spin. You should not need to apply any torque for this to happen because everything is still loose. If this is not happening, then check your Z-screw is not excessively bent. If your Z-screw is bent, then I'm afraid this is bad news because you'll need a new one if you can't figure out a way to straighten it. I can't stress how important it is that this screw and its corresponding thread must be frictionless. Any friction here will cause print quality problems or worse. This is the point where you also need to tighten these two screws as shown, and then let the bar assembly ride down to halfway on the screw thread before fully tightening the motor onto the frame. Again, this should all go in perfectly well, but if anything is bent or not straight, you may have problems. When you've done all this, you should be able to still move the Z-axis up and down freely by hand without any effort at all. It should spin without any force. If it doesn't, then you need to figure out why and fix it before you move on. This is critical. This step comes after fitting the belt, which has no special tricks to it, so I haven't included it in the video. If you slide the hot end back and forth on its rail like so, then you may notice it feels like it bumps into something now and then, like there's speed ramps along the rail. If this happens, then you'll know it, and you must adjust the eccentric nut on the bottom wheel with the spanner. It doesn't matter which way you turn it, or rather, because it goes round in a full 360 circle, then there isn't a specific way to turn it. You need to figure out which way moves it away from the bar. I find it helpful to loosen it just to the point where I can just about spin the POM wheels, that's the black wheels, by hand with a moderate effort. So it's not free to spin, but you can just about spin it. That seems to be about the right level of tension. You should do this also on the two other axes at this point. That's actually a total of 4 extra eccentric nuts. They're the same as the one you've just done. The bed has 2 under it, and there's 1 either side of the horizontal bar. If you don't do this, then I do think the wheels will sort of wear down to fit over time, but I think it's better to get it right initially, especially if it's really off as it was in mine. That would definitely have caused print errors. As I mentioned earlier, these nuts never seem to work for me. They never go in straight, or they won't turn when I'm tightening it up, so they just, yeah. Best thing to do is just slide the frame for the filament holder on before you put these 2 screws in, as they will block it from sliding on. It's a pretty simple step and it will just save you some frustration, unless somehow these things work for you, which they don't work for me. The manual says to put the end caps on the top frame, but I would leave the left one off because you're going to need to put a filament guide on this end. If you have another printer, then this is a really good time to print one in advance, but it won't hurt to wait until you're done to print it. What is important though, right from the start, is not to get grease from the screw onto the filament. You can print this piece, I've linked it in the description, but if you don't have a printer yet, just make a sleeve out of card or something just to do the same job until you do. You don't actually need to attach this piece, it works just fine as it is. It's quite happy to just rattle around for months on end, but you can screw it on if you really want to. Once you've plugged everything in, as per the manual, by the way, the little clips on the end of the cables, they tell you where to plug everything in, but there's no other tricks there. This is the point where you can put the bed back on. I clipped it like this because then the hot end won't hit the bulldog clips this way. First check the adjustment wheels are around the centre of travel or lower, and then screw the hot end down so that the nozzle is just touching the bed. Then you could slide the Z sensor so that the micro switch is just clicked on. You can hear it click, and then tighten the whole assembly up for the micro switch. You may wish to lower the bed using the wheels to give you more adjustment room when levelling. It's kind of a trade-off between having the springs lower or higher. I tend to go just slightly lower of the middle. We left the X belt loose until now. The trick here that I missed and had to come back to is that you need the belt to not scrape against the edge of the aluminium profile, because it's really sharp. As you can see, after just an hour of printing, there's a mark on the belt, so it's easy to imagine this belt being cut or worn or torn within a few hours. The simple solution is to tilt the tension piece downwards. Pull as hard as you can while tightening these two screws. It's not easy to do, but you're looking for a good twang of the belt. Exact tightness is not really necessary, but if you have it too loose and it's able to skip whole teeth, this causes what we call layer shifts in the print. It's also really important to make sure that this tensioning piece can't move around too. Just by tilting it slightly, I mean what, about 5-10 degrees? Mid-print, I saw a significant layer shift. So if there's any play in this piece, then you may think that it's a belt problem, but it could just be moving around. Congratulations, you're now just about ready to print. Calibrating the bed is not hard, but it is a whole topic of its own. I suggest looking at my video that should be linked now on how to calibrate a bed properly. The key to good printing is good calibration, so it's well worth understanding how it works, especially if you're new to the hobby. As a footnote to this, because the bed is textured and not glass, it is more tolerant to bad calibration, but the method for calibration is essentially the same. And that's it, you're now ready to print. I suggest trying the dog from the included SD card first, because it is smaller than the cat. Although, be prepared for the included filament to be about a metre too short for it to complete properly. Annoying. If you haven't already, then make sure you buy a 1 kilogram reel of PLA to start with. I recommend any colour other than black, and definitely avoid wood, marble, glow-in-the-dark until you're more knowledgeable, and even then wood is a pain. Silk and shiny colours, however, they are fine if you're a beginner, as they print pretty much the same as plain colours, so feel free to try those. Please like if you thought this video was useful, and if you want more tips then I suggest subscribing, as I already have a fair few videos around this topic and plenty more to come. If this is your first printer, then welcome to the 3D printing community, and I hope to see you in the next video. Thank you for watching.